Want to dominate your fantasy football league? Then you need to nail your defense. DST selection each week. Week 7 was a wild ride for defenses, with some huge scoring performances that likely swung matchups. The good news? Our top-tier defenses, Cleveland and New England, absolutely delivered. We also saw double-digit scores from Kansas City, Chicago, and the Los Angeles Rams, while Seattle chipped in a solid 9 points. Overall, our rankings steered you towards some winning plays. But here's where it gets controversial. I originally had the Houston Texans pegged as a top 10 play, but I waffled and moved them down, trusting in the Seahawks offense. Huge mistake. Houston exploded for 18 points, finishing as the third best DST that week. Ouch. We also saw surprise performances from the Panthers and Cowboys, proving that anything can happen in the NFL. However, that Panthers game taught me a valuable lesson, and I've tweaked my formula to give even more weight to opponent quality, or lack thereof. Why? Because the Panthers' success was largely fueled by the Jets' offensive ineptitude. So, what are you going to get each week? This isn't just a list of rankings. It's a peek inside my head, explaining why each team is ranked where it is. Think of it like this. Tier 1. The elite plays. These are the defenses you confidently start, expecting a big return. Tier 2. Strong plays. Solid options with a good chance of producing a respectable score. Tier 3. Borderline top 10 plays. These are the risk-reward options, either good defenses in tough matchups or mediocre defenses in favorable situations. Use with caution. Tier 4. Deep league targets. Only consider these if you're desperate or playing in a league with a ton of teams. Tier 5. Avoid at all costs. These are the defenses you want nowhere near your starting lineup. And this is the part most people miss. I track my accuracy. Each week, I'll keep a running tally of how many top 10 defenses I correctly predict, so you can see just how effective the BOD, Best Overall Defense rankings are. 2025 season success rate, percentage of top 10 defenses correctly predicted, Week 7, 6-4, season long. 35-35 BOD formula and philosophy. If you've been following along, you know my philosophy. I prioritize defenses that generate pressure on the quarterback and force turnovers. That's pretty standard, right? But here's the twist. I focus on the underlying metrics, looking at the quality of the defense, not just the perceived weakness of the opponent. While matchups are important, I refuse to blindly elevate a bad defense simply because they're facing a struggling offense. Bad defenses are bad for a reason. To identify the best plays each week, I use the following formula. Note, EPA allowed is expressed as a small decimal, hence the multiplication. Pressure rate times 1.5, plus tackle for a loss rate, plus turnover rate times 2, minus expected points per play allowed times 100. Conversion rate allowed times 0.5, plus opponent scoring rate. Then I add that total to the team's average fantasy points scored per game over the last 6 weeks. Why? Because past fantasy points are a pretty reliable indicator of future fantasy points. Of course, I make manual adjustments each week to account for factors like injuries and weather, but I try to avoid relying too much on gut feel or unfounded worries about win conditions. With that out of the way, let's dive into the Week 8 rankings. For a more detailed discussion of DST plays for this week, check out Eric's Pick 3 DST video over on the NFL on NBC YouTube page. DST Week 8 rankings. Rank Tier 1 DSTs, opponent, BOD ranking. 1. Tier 1 DSTs, opponent, BOD ranking. 1. Indianapolis Colts versus 10. 16. Atlanta Falcons versus WAS. 3. New England Patriots versus CLE. 12. It might raise some eyebrows to see a team ranked 16th in my overall BOD rankings come in as the top-ranked defense this week. But that's a testament to how much the Titans are struggling. They've surrendered a whopping 14 points per game to opposing defenses over the past 4 weeks. Maybe Calvin Ridley will make his return this week, but honestly, I'm not sure it'll make a huge difference. The Colts rank 8th in turnover rate and 10th in pressure rate over the last 6 weeks, while also holding the 12th spot in tackles for a loss or no gain. I simply believe they're a good enough defense to capitalize on a matchup against an offense with the 4th highest turnover rate and the 2nd worst sack rate in the league. I've been stashing the Falcons wherever I could this week, specifically targeting this matchup against the Dolphins. So they better deliver. Over the last 6 weeks, they rank 5th in EPA, expected points added per play allowed, 6th in turnover rate, and 9th in pressure rate, while averaging a solid 8.2 fantasy points per game. Now, they're facing a Dolphins team that seems to be on the verge of collapse. The Dolphins have given up 9 points per game to opposing defenses over the past month and are likely to be without Darren Waller, who had emerged as their 2nd best receiver. With the Falcons being significant home favorites, I'm confidently starting them wherever possible. The Chiefs remain in Tier 1, primarily because the Commanders are likely to be without Jaden Daniels, who suffered a hamstring injury on Sunday. The status of Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, who both missed last week, remains uncertain, potentially leaving the Commanders' offense severely depleted. Meanwhile, the Chiefs rank 2nd in EPA per play allowed, 3rd in opponent scoring rate, 7th in pressure rate, 9th in conversion rate allowed, and 10th in turnover rate over the last 6 weeks. Their offense is finding its rhythm with Rashee Rice, potentially forcing Marcus Mariota to play from behind in comeback mode, which bodes well for the Chiefs' defense. The Patriots are leading the AFC East and playing exceptionally well recently. They've averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks and rank 9th in turnover rate and 10th in EPA per play allowed. They also boast the 3rd fewest yards allowed per carry in the NFL, surrendering only 103.4 rushing yards per game, which ranks 11th in the league. Given the Browns' increasingly run-heavy approach, I anticipate the Patriots will focus on stopping Quinshon Judkins and forcing Dylan Gabriel to beat them with his arm. I don't believe he's capable, which explains why the Browns have allowed 9 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses over the past month. Rank Tier 2 DST's opponent BOD ranking. 5. Houston Texans vs. SF 1. 6. Minnesota Vikings at LAC 11. 8. Chicago Bears at BOW 6. 9. Buffalo Bills at CAR. The Texans may have suffered a loss on Monday Night Football, but their defense continued to impress. Over the last 6 weeks, they rank 1st in opponent scoring rate, 1st in conversion rate allowed, 1st in EPA per play allowed, and 8th in tackles for a loss or no gain. George Kittle returned this week, but it appears Brock Purdy will be sidelined for the 49ers. Additionally, Jawan Jennings is battling multiple injuries, and Ricky Pearsall has yet to return to practice, suggesting the 49ers offense isn't operating at full strength. The Vikings didn't deliver their best performance against the Eagles this weekend, but they still averaged 9 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. They rank 3rd in tackles for a loss or no gain, 4th in opponent scoring rate, 4th in conversion rate allowed, 5th in pressure rate, and 8th in EPA per play allowed. Kimani Vidal predictably regressed after facing the Dolphins, and the Chargers suffered another offensive tackle injury on Sunday, forcing them to play their 6th string tackle. As a result, they've allowed 7.3 fantasy points to opposing defenses over the past month, making the Vikings a solid bet this week. The Bucs face a mediocre matchup against the Saints offense that allows just 6.5 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses over the past month. However, the Bears may have revealed a significant weakness on Sunday by blitzing Spencer Rattler with their corners and safeties, applying constant pressure. The Bucs rank 6th in pressure rate and 8th in tackles for a loss or no gain, indicating they can disrupt the backfield. Furthermore, the Saints lost Kendre Miller, which may seem insignificant, but he's been a more effective runner than Alvin Kamara this season. They also lost center Eric McCoy to a season-ending biceps injury, weakening their running game. I expect the Bucs to exploit Rattler's vulnerability to pressure. This Bears ranking is subject to change depending on Lamar Jackson's status. He missed Monday's practice, which isn't encouraging. Without him, the Ravens' offense is significantly less intimidating. Over the last 6 weeks, the Bears rank first in turnover rate, 13th in EPA per play allowed, and 14th in opponent scoring rate, while averaging 7.8 fantasy points per game. They could potentially score 8 or 9 points against a weakened Ravens team. To be clear, their ranking will drop significantly if Lamar Jackson plays. The Bills' defense is in an interesting situation, with 2 suspended defensive linemen, Michael Holt and Larry Ogunjobi, eligible to return this week. While the team could certainly use them, their roles remain uncertain. First-round pick Maxwell Hairston has also had his practice window opened, but his return this week is unlikely, and we're awaiting practice reports to confirm Matt Milano's status. The Bills rank first in pressure rate, 4th in tackles for a loss or no gain, 12th in EPA per play allowed, and 12th in opponent scoring rate over the last 6 weeks, excluding the Ravens game. Bryce Young will be out, with Andy Dalton stepping in, but I'm not sure that's a downgrade. However, the Panthers' insistence on splitting carries between Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle will likely diminish the running game's impact compared to if Dowdle had full control. For a more detailed discussion of DST plays for this week, check out Eric's Pick 3 DST video over on the NFL on NBC YouTube page. Rank Tier 3 DSTs, opponent, BOD ranking. It's all before football. Los Angeles Tigers versus NY. They play different teams this every week. But the Browns are a solid defense, ranking 2nd in tackles for a loss or no gain, 3rd in conversion rate allowed, 4th in EPA per play allowed, and 8th in opponent scoring rate over the last 6 weeks. However, this translates to just 7.5 fantasy points per game, and they're on the road against a Patriots team that has allowed only 3 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses. This feels like a 6-point performance in the making. The Chargers rank 6th in tackles for a loss or no gain, 10th in conversion rate allowed, and 13th in turnover rate, while averaging 5 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. The magic surrounding Carson Wentz is fading, and the Vikings have allowed 9.6 fantasy points to opposing defenses over the past month. So there's a chance the Chargers could sneak into the top 10 here. Can you trust the Bengals defense? That's the million-dollar question in fantasy football this week, because we're always eager to exploit matchups against the Jets. Justin Fields was benched on Sunday for Tyrod Taylor, and then Aaron Glenn wouldn't commit to Fields as the starter. The Jets have allowed 14 points per game to opposing defenses over the past month, but the Bengals defense has scored just 2.2 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. This defense lacks any redeeming qualities, but the Jets are undeniably bad. The Steelers, Eagles, and Broncos are typically reliable defenses, but they haven't been as dominant as usual, and they're facing average or below average matchups. The Steelers rank 2nd in turnover rate, but the Eagles don't rank in the top 10 in any of my preferred metrics, and the Giants have allowed just 7 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses with Jackson Dart at quarterback. Finally, I understand the hesitation to trust the Broncos after they allowed 32 points to the Giants on Sunday. But Denver ranks 2nd in pressure rate, 3rd in conversion rate allowed, 9th in EPA per play allowed, and 12th in opponent scoring rate over the last month. It wouldn't surprise me if they rebounded this week. Rank Tier 4 DSTs. Opponent, BOD ranking. Board ranking, open ranking, previous week audit, 19. Carolina Panthers vs. BUF. 18. New Orleans Saints vs. TB. 21. San Francisco 49ers at How, 24. Dallas Cowboys at Den, 26. Washington Commanders at KC. The Packers simply haven't lived up to expectations as a fantasy defense. While they generate pressure on the quarterback, they struggle to force turnovers and allow a significant number of points, resulting in an average of just 4 fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks. It's difficult to trust them this week. The Bucs continue to struggle this season. Mike Evans returned on Monday, only to suffer a broken collarbone, sidelining him for most of the regular season. Bucky Irving and Chris Godwin are reportedly progressing, but their availability for Week 8 remains uncertain. Emeka Egbuka did return, and while I'm not a fan of, I might move San Francisco up slightly if he's ruled out, but likely only to the bottom of the next tier. Rank, Tier 5 DSTs, opponent, BOD ranking. BOD ranking. This will be on Miami Dolphins at ATL, 29. 24. New York Jets at SIN. 25. Tennessee Titans at IND. 28. Baltimore Ravens versus Chai. 31. Los Angeles Rams, bye. 4. Jacksonville Jaguars, bye. 13. 30. Detroit Lions, bye. 2. 31. Arizona Cardinals, bye. 22. Las Vegas Raiders, bye. 27. Tier 5 represents the defenses I recommend avoiding in all but the deepest of leagues. So what do you think? Are these rankings on point, or am I completely missing something? Which defenses are you targeting this week and why? Let's discuss in the comments below. Maybe you think the 49ers are being underrated, or perhaps you believe the Bengals' upside against the Jets is worth the risk. I'm eager to hear your perspectives.